Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. It's your host, Sarah, and today I have Talon with me. This is a really interesting episode. But before we get into it, a couple of, I don't know what we call this, housekeeping things.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
End of year discussion.
Yeah. That's housekeeping.
Housekeeping. So today is Tuesday, December 3rd. I apologize. This episode is coming out late. Last week was a holiday week, and there's just been a lot happening. So a couple days late, it is into December now. This is actually going to be the last new episode of the year. I am taking December off to focus on, I don't know what I'm focusing on. I want to say to focus on like resting and all of these things, but I'll still be working, and I do feel a lot of burnout. So, I'm going to try to rest, but taking the month off from the podcast will be helpful. We've done this before. It's been quite a while, but the way that I'm going to do this year is different from past years. I'm actually stealing this practice from a celebrity podcast that I listen to, a junk podcast, basically, that's fun to listen to while I do my dishes, but what she does when she takes time off from the podcast is posts greatest hits episodes. So for the next 3 to 4 Sundays, I'm going to have an episode live, but it's going to be one of my like very far past episodes that is one of the greatest hits episodes. So I think that'll be fun for some of you who are new to the podcast and maybe haven't gotten through the 200 plus episodes that have been posted. Which is totally bananas to think about. So look forward to those. If you are on Patreon, there's going to be some short bonus episodes for you. So head over there to listen to those. There will be at least 2 to 3 episodes during the month of December that won't go live to the public. Okay, let's talk about this episode.
Okay.
So the other day, I'm minding my business, minding my own business, reading my news app, which I read far too much. Strategy for y'all in the States especially, stop listening to and reading the news if you can. I cannot. So
I haven't read the news since 2020.
Oh. Well, tell us about the positive impact of that on you.
Well, I don't know that the impact is positive so much as I don't know that it's had a positive impact on me. It definitely has made me feel like I connect with people less because they're like, oh my god, did you hear about this? And I'm like, nope, I don't read the news. But I guess mental health wise, I have way less anxiety, and I don't catastrophize about what if, because I have like a horrible fear of death and the death of like my family and friends and people I love and care about. And so me stopping reading the news in 2020, because that was the only way I could get through and work through COVID without having a mental breakdown, which is what I had to do. So I guess I have less catastrophizing.
I love that. I actually hadn't thought about the connection between news and death. And like, I know that you have a fear of death, and there's a very kind of existential thing about that for you.
Yeah.
And I know that you, like many people, ask yourselves, what will I do when my parents pass? And we've talked about that with my relationship with my mom. But as a partner of someone with BPD who's chronically suicidal, tell me about, like, does that trigger you?
You and your suicidality?
Like my suicidal ideation, like, does that trigger your significant fear of death that you're talking about? Because I didn't know about this.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it does. And I don't know. This is going to probably sound like super cold, maybe, but in the very beginning of our relationship, you were very honest with the statistics of people who have this particular personality disorder and suicidality and completion and attempts. So like I kind of went in knowing, and I am as prepared as anyone can be, which you are never prepared for something that could happen like that, right? But like I know the risks and I know the statistics of which I took on. So it's not something that like triggers me like the news, because the news is like the what if, oh my God, that could happen to me, but I don't know the probability. Whereas like this, I know a probability. Does that make sense?
It does, and I want to make sure everyone knows who's listening that I'm not suicidal.
Yes, also that. There's like that in that, like, I see you every day. I kind of know what to look for. We have a cope ahead plan. We have, harm reduction strategies. We have all of these things that are put in place, but subconsciously put in place. So, like, I'm not consciously like, oh my God. Subconsciously, sometimes when, if you're having a rough time, I'm like, oh no. But it's not this like forefront, like existential dread. But sometimes like at night, if I can't sleep, I think about it and I'm sad. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's not your fault, but
yeah, I mean,
it's just the way it is.
I think one of the things that I really love about you is that you have a 100%, and I can say that without a doubt, 100% trust in me that I can take care of myself and or get the support that I need if I can't take care of myself. Whereas like,
yes,
2020 COVID, it's like, well, you can't trust anything.
I couldn't trust anything, or like, not to sound like whatever, I don't know what the word is, but I couldn't trust anyone. I couldn't trust anyone to keep themselves safe, to keep me safe, to keep our community safe. And there was no vaccine. There was no like light at the end of the tunnel for so long, and I was working through that.
Yeah.
So, and that was the only social interaction that I had beyond texting my group chat and the people who lived in my home. You know what I mean? The only people I saw were the people I worked with. That was it.
Well, and one of your best friends who you were texting she's pretty panicky, so I could understand how that would.
When it comes to like illness and death, she has a huge fear of that. So there was that too. But yeah, I stopped reading the news because I just couldn't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, we went on quite the tangent before we even got into this episode.
Yeah, but we haven't tangented in so long.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
I like it.
Me too.
So before I start this recording, I want to acknowledge that I am going to be talking about Nick Cannon and his recent diagnosis that's been in the news, and wanting to say that Nick Cannon has a history of making some really harmful comments, specifically regarding the Jewish community. And I am in no way promoting any of the comments that he's made. He has, formally apologized for those comments and stated that he is learning from those comments and working with other people in the community to educate himself and, essentially do better. But I just wanted to say that I hope that me having this episode and talking about his recent diagnosis is not triggering to anyone or harmful to anyone, but, a good discussion of personality disorders and the way that they are talked about in this case, news, in particular with Nick Cannon. So I just wanted to say that this episode is coming from a place of love and not trying to promote anyone who has a history of making very harmful comments towards specific groups of people, but rather because he is a person who is public about a disorder that is highly stigmatized. Okay, so let's get into our episode.
Okay.
We were talking about how the other day I was minding my business reading the news.
Mm-hmm.
I came across an article that was like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. And then I thought, that's not surprising to me, but that is so interesting. The article was something about Nick Cannon reports he needs help, and he has been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder.
Yep.
So I thought, oh my God, this is an important topic to talk about. I don't have narcissistic personality disorder. I haven't met too many people that have that diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, everyone talks about so-and-so is a narcissist. TikTok people, Instagram people are always talking about like healing from narcissistic abuse and all of these things, which
or narcissistic tendencies, or they're a narcissist but they don't have narcissistic personality disorder, and it's like, well, okay. There's a lot of nuance there, I think.
I think it's important you said that. There is a lot of nuance there because I struggle with the concept of like people referring to people as a narcissist. And I don't want to invalidate that person's experience who feels like they've been wronged by anyone.
Sure.
I know that people report the same thing about people with borderline. Reddit is full of like healing from borderline abuse, all of these things, whatever. And I also don't want to invalidate the person who actually has narcissistic personality disorder. If y'all go back, I had this really great episode with a person named April who has NPD, and she explained her NPD in a way to me that was so profound. She said something along the lines of like, I had to learn to understand feelings because I don't have the experience of feeling feelings the same way I know that other people do.
Maybe that could be on Greatest Hits.
Maybe. Who knows? But I thought that episode was like so interesting. And, you know, people with NPD are demonized so much, and it's incredibly unfair. And I think how beautiful that Nick Cannon came out with his diagnosis and him saying, I want to learn about it more. I need to learn about it more, because don't we all need to learn about our stuff more, regardless of what our stuff is? And how beautiful that he was willing to say that to the public, knowing that this is something that could be probably very demonized. I guess I don't know if he knows that, but that would just be based on my experience, that would be kind of my thought. And so we have this beautiful opportunity in the public to observe new dialogue about people with personality disorders. And he's just an interesting guy, too. I've always wondered, like, homeboy has like 12 kids. Like, I cannot even imagine. And he was married to fucking Mariah Carey. Like, you can't get a bigger, more beautiful, amazing, interesting woman to have been married to and have beautiful twins with. Their twins are so sweet, so cute looking. Anyways, I want to take this time in our episode to talk about this and to talk about how important speaking about personality disorders are, and especially cluster B personality disorders are, because there is overlap between NPD and BPD. And of course, there's differences too.
And there's co-occurring diagnoses, and there are, like, they do share some traits, but it's important, I think, to distinguish the cluster Bs.
Yes. And also celebrate that people are hopefully going to learn a bit more about those of us with personality disorders. And he also has ADHD, but
yeah, co-occurring.
So let's take a second to listen to just the brief bit of news about this and him speaking about it. I hate that there's input from a psychiatrist or someone in the middle of it, because I don't like the way that she speaks about the disorder necessarily. I don't think it's very person-centered, but let's listen to it. How do you feel?
I feel good, and then we'll make sure to, like, get her name and credentials probably after we watch the clip, right?
I mean, I'll just put the link to the clip in the show notes.
Good idea.
It's just a clip from Entertainment Tonight. But yeah, let's listen.
Let's turn to Nick Cannon, who says he needs help after being diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder.
There is a self-importance in me. I believe I am not ordinary.
Well, somebody with narcissistic personality disorder really doesn't follow rules. They kind of think that they are the center of the universe. They also really have a hard time caring about other people. While they may be superficially charming or charismatic, when you scratch the surface, they often won't be there for you.
The 44-year-old, who also has ADHD, says he discovered he had the disorder after undergoing tests, but still doesn't fully understand the condition. Nick says he is healing and is embracing therapy in such a strong way.
Narcissists often suffer from anxiety, depression, other mental health disorders, and that component can often be hereditary. Plus, the environment that narcissists create for their children is very cold and very transactional and is contingent upon the kid performing well. It definitely creates an environment where children often lack self-esteem because of the parenting.
Of course, Nick has proudly fathered 12 children with 6 different women over the last 13 years, telling E.T. he makes time for them all.
Being a dad is what my life is about.
Narcissists often want other people to see their prowess, and that can be from collecting trophies and awards to, having as many number of kids, but those kids really need to be reflections of them and really make them look good. Therapy can be really helpful.
Okay, so what was your experience listening to that nice celebrity news outtake?
Well, my first initial thought about it is I wish Aaron Lee Carr was in charge of everything, because I do feel the way that information is conveyed in entertainment news sources, I got quotation marks out here, is edited and presented in a way to make you feel something specific.
What do you think that it was edited to make you feel about Nick Cannon?
Well, I think that, so for me, my experience is like they do the clip of Nick Cannon saying like, oh, I want to be a really good dad or whatever, and they talk about his kids, and then they edit the psychiatrist saying that people with narcissistic personality disorder are this, they do this. And it was very like, first of all, I think they edited the psychiatrist very hard. I think they edited, hopefully, all of her nuance out, hopefully all of her context out, and just like took her factual things. Because that was a pretty like one-sided thing.
It was very one-sided. I didn't hear her say anything positive. And
Right.
I do feel like as clinicians, we have the responsibility to state the facts.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. And we also have the responsibility to indicate that people with mental illness are not bad.
100%. And the editing and the presentation is not in her control. You know what I mean? That's like the thing. And I know Aaron Lee Carr edits her stuff.
Oh my gosh. Okay, pause.
I know.
Erin Lee Carr is my favorite documentarian. She's queer and hot, and she follows me on Instagram. But she's the documentarian that did the Britney Spears documentary a couple years ago, and the one about the teenage girl whose text messages were really awful to the boyfriend who completed suicide. She did a documentary about Gypsy Rose and her mom. So she does really interesting documentaries, and she absolutely is a great person to learn from. But Entertainment Tonight, probably not the best place to learn. But all of the news articles about Nick Cannon's personality disorder are, of course, celebrity news because he's a celebrity. Right. So I do think, the way that they spoke about NPD wasn't helpful. I wish that they had said, this is a big deal for someone to be honest and open and to come out with this diagnosis. And it's a big deal for people to say that they want to get support for their mental health. regardless of what their mental health is. But I mean, personality disorders especially, it's possible to get support, and it's possible to not have your, in this case, narcissistic personality disorder have negative effects on your children's lives, for example. I mean, he said being a dad is the most important thing to him, and I want to spend time with my kids. Of course, we don't know exactly the internal motivation for that. Is it because he wants his children to be a reflection of him or not? I don't know, but isn't that kind of normal for parents to want their children to reflect them? Like, it's devastating to me that you and I can't have babies that are half me and half you.
Yeah.
Because I want to see what it would be like to have a baby with my curly hair and your blue eyes. I want to know what that child would be like. And if I had children, I would hope that they would grow up to be, person-centered and community members who are of service to other people. Like, I want to see the things that I value in myself in a child that I raise.
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head that you don't have narcissistic personality disorder, because that, when it comes to kids, isn't generally the typical motivation that's been recorded, right?
Sure, but it is motivation. It is motivation to see you and your child. So I don't know. I thought that statement was like, I mean, of course, all statements about anything in a short period of time in the news, like you said, are going to be
skewed.
And again, we don't know anyone's internal motivations, but he didn't say, I want to spend time with my kids because I want to make them like me.
Right. And I mean, that's like the duality of being a human being, right? Like, you can have a personality disorder and not be a piece of shit. And you can, have another, diagnosis or another disorder and be a horrible piece of shit. Like, it's like the duality of a human being.
Yeah.
I think it's like, unfortunately, we hear more about the negative impacts of personality disorders on loved ones and those in the inner circle, because negative impacts, we remember those more. Like, what do they say? One good review reaches 10 people. One bad review reaches 100.
Yeah. I mean, nobody goes on Yelp to talk about their good experience, I guess, at a restaurant. That's like, that's like, when I think about my ex-wife, I think she's probably not telling people about the good times.
Right. And I mean, and there's a reason that they send you literally like a certificate, a sticker, and a plaque when you get 100, like 5 stars on Yelp. Like, that's a thing. They send you a package, like, congratulations, because this is impossible. But I guess, like, anything that we're going to see in the media about, I'll just say cluster B type personalities, I'll just generalize, is going to be canned. And it's going to be easy to digest, and it's going to be recycled information, I think, with little to no insight and very little to no context, and absolutely no nuance and no duality. So I think when it comes to dealing with, like, acceptance of a personality disorder, the impact of a personality disorder, and things like that, I think that we need to remember the humanity of it, because I don't find that is often talked about. It's just like, oh, well, I'm finding, like, maybe it's just like where I'm at in social media and stuff, but people are, or I'm running across all these videos of, like, I was misdiagnosed with a personality disorder when really I have this. And it's like, well, I mean, yes, cluster B type personality disorders, particularly borderline, are overdiagnosed in, female identified people. I think that's what they say, is that they're overdiagnosed or diagnosed more than men.
Yeah, the term overdiagnosis is not the same as saying people assigned female at birth have diagnoses more than men, though.
Okay.
Overdiagnosis assumes that people are getting a diagnosis when it isn't accurate.
Right. So that's the word that I'm seeing a lot right now.
Oh.
That's the word I'm seeing. And then it's like, oh yeah, women are, I'll just say women as a generalization, assigned female at birth, are overdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder and underdiagnosed, I'll just say, with autism. That's something I'm running across right now. And I don't have any feelings on that because I don't have any background in that. But the way I'm taking it is kind of almost like a backlash against personality disorders.
Oh, yeah.
When really it's like, no, I mean, you can have a personality disorder and 100 other things. You can have 3 personality disorders. Like it's,
sure.
But I don't know. I think talking about it, having people out with a personality disorder ideally will reduce stigma and then will reduce that like almost backlash of like, oh, I don't have a personality disorder. And like, it is okay.
Yes.
To have one.
Yes.
Right? So like that was my point, is like reducing stigma.
I think even if Entertainment Tonight isn't presenting this in a person-centered way.
Yes.
Although they didn't inherently do anything that was bad specific to Nick Cannon.
No.
I'm saying I didn't really love the way that psychiatrist presented information, but ultimately this is good.
Yes.
This is a good thing.
Yes.
But I want to circle back to your comment, which is the statistics do not show that people are being overdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder. What we do know is that there are high overlaps in symptom presentation between BPD and autism. Mm-hmm. And there is a history of people being maybe misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed with autism. But there is a higher co-occurrence of having autism and BPD that we did not historically know about. So people are getting a lot of autism diagnoses now. And perhaps doctors or psychiatrists who don't know a lot of BPD, know a lot about BPD, are then saying BPD doesn't fit, you're actually autistic. Well, for some people that can be true.
Yes.
And also, I am seeing a trend of like, oh my God, I'm so grateful I don't actually have BPD because I have this other thing. And it's like, well, I can understand that from a you don't want to be stigmatized perspective. Mm-hmm. But also, like, that's not really fair to people with borderline who are like, but I don't want other people to be grateful they're not me.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad we're talking about this because this has been eating at me for months. Yes, that's, see, this is why I wanted to talk to you about this, because you have that like statistic and you have that education and that knowledge about that, where I'm like seeing this and I'm like, this does not sit right with me and I don't know why. That doesn't make sense. But you say all the things that are locked inside my brain that I just don't have the language or the context for. So I'm really glad that we talked about that because, I feel good.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
I feel good. Yeah, that feels good.
Social media is like such a beautiful tool for connecting people.
Absolutely.
And it's also so harmful from a misinformation perspective.
And we have to take everything with a grain of salt.
Fake news, baby. Fake news.
Well, we have to take everything with a grain of salt, which I always try to do. But yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And I want to circle back on one more thing that you said real quick when you were saying that, like, oh, thank God I don't have BPD, I have this other thing. Whether that is true or not, it's still like, oh, you don't have the quote bad thing. Your other new thing is still presenting in a way that is impacting people. So just because it's, quote, not the bad thing.
Or impacting them.
Or impacting you doesn't necessarily mean that you're fine and you're good and your work stops there and everything's great. It just means that your work is slightly different.
It's different now.
Yeah.
Well, and also, like, I don't want to invalidate or demonize people who have felt this relief of, oh, I don't have BPD because I have this other thing or this other thing or this other thing. And it's like, I can understand being grateful. And as a person who is never going to lose their BPD diagnosis or their BPD symptoms, it is hurtful to hear people say that, and so those two things can be true. Like, people can be grateful they don't have this persistent across the lifespan shit show. And we can be sad that they're grateful that they're not like us because I got to wake up every day and live this life.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, all of this to say, I don't have narcissistic personality disorder. So if there's someone listening who has thoughts about this, who has NPD, I would love, love, love to hear from you. You can email me at boldbeautifulborderline@gmail.com. Let's talk about this. Perhaps you have a different thought or experience, and your thought and experience comes before mine because, again, I don't have NPD. I do, however, have a personality disorder that is in the same cluster as NPD. So I want to talk about some of the similarities and some of the differences for people who are listening.
Cluster B.
Cluster B, baby. So those of us in Cluster B, this is categorized as dramatic, emotional, or erratic disorders. Am I dramatic, emotional, and erratic?
Can I answer in a State of the Union, like, super honest way?
Why would we do anything otherwise? Check.
Yes, and I think that that is like a surface thing, right? So like when you look at somebody who has, we'll use borderline personality disorder because that's what I have the most firsthand experience with. And you look at their initial reaction to something that you perceive as small, it could feel dramatic, erratic, and what's the other one?
Emotional.
100%. So if you're looking at it like through a very dehumanized lens, that is 100%.
Yeah, and I mean,
it.
Emotional isn't offensive to me. Like I do have strong emotions. This is why I've always categorized BPD for years and years as being a super feeler. Your superpower is feeling your emotions. To the point that it eats you up.
Sets you on fire.
And like I can be dramatic. Like I am over the top. I remember at work one time years and years ago, we were talking about this girl I was seeing and I was like, she doesn't exfoliate. And I like laid on the floor just like, I can't believe it. I don't even know if I was exfoliating my skin at the time, but like, you know.
Yeah.
I remember my mom spoke about this, like being a kid and having these huge meltdowns about not being able to understand math, just like inconsolable. I wish I had been encouraged to like do drama.
You would have done well.
I could be the Nick Cannon. No, I'm kidding. The funny thing about the difference actually between, this is a great segue, between NPD and BPD is like, I actually would literally never want to do that because I don't want to stand on stage and be seen.
Right.
So like in my own life with someone I trust, I could be dramatic. And at work, I had, a lot of trust from people, but like, I don't actually want to be seen because I don't believe that I'm worthy or good enough. And my constant fear is not being seen as worthy or lovable. So like, this takes us directly into the differences, right? The primary concern of someone with BPD is fear of abandonment. And instability in their like identity. Whereas the primary concern for someone with NPD is being able to maintain their self-image and their desire for admiration. So those are some, differences. I mean, but they have similar roots though.
Yeah, they have similar roots, and I think they also, I think that sometimes, depending on the person and the situation, they can appear very similar and impact people very similarly.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and one of the similarities is like this excessive need for validation.
Oh, yep.
Whereas...
That's where they look the same, I think.
Yes. Whereas the person with BPD may have like the intense emotional dysregulation. A person with NPD may present like they don't have a lot of empathy.
Right. And that like level of like entitlement. And that like constant, like, it's about me. It's about me. It's about me.
Well, and with borderline, we've said this, like, it has to be about me first.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be about me and maintaining my mental health first, because if I don't, the impact of that is so detrimental.
Right.
But not because I don't want there to be space for yours.
Right. And you always circle back.
Yeah.
Like, I will say that is like the one difference, you know, even when it's particularly hard or things are like not great, you always circle back and you make sure that I'm okay, and we apologize, repair, and we you know, move forward.
Yeah.
And I never feel after an argument or a disagreement or whatever, afterwards, I never feel like you don't care about me.
Yeah.
Because I know you do.
Yeah.
Occasionally during an argument, I do feel like you don't care.
Yeah.
And that is when I'm like, well, she doesn't have the room to care
Yeah.
about me right now. And honestly, like, I will say, like, sometimes in an argument, I don't have the room to care about you right now.
Yeah.
And then we sit in separate rooms and we chill out and cool down, honestly, and then we come back.
Meet in the middle.
Meet in the middle and we figure it out. But
Well, and again, similarities here is like people with NPD have to learn behavior that's effective, and people with BPD have to learn behavior that's effective. And it's just in similar ways. And I remember in the episode with April, she was talking about like needing to learn how to come towards people and like how to engage in these healthy relationships. And she spoke about like, you know, her believing the root of her symptoms was also trauma. I don't know a lot about, I can't speak to that part of like the root of NPD.
right.
But I mean, pretty sure everyone I know about who has NPD had significant childhood trauma. Again, potential similarities. Okay, let's talk about like what the research says on the kind of like emotional experience. So people with BPD struggle with our rapid mood swings and our feelings of emptiness and kind of being out of control, whereas people with NPD are able to control their emotions much more. It says emotional experience is more controlled, but driven by an underlying sense of vulnerability. So I think they too fear being vulnerable.
Right.
Whereas we want to be seen in our vulnerability. That's my experience. I don't know what the fear is for people with NPD of vulnerability. I can't speak to it. But the outward presentation then for someone with NPD can be like dismissive. But it also says like internally that person struggles with fear of criticism and fear of failure, and that too can provoke like feelings of shame, anger, depression. And my understanding is people with BPD or NPD do experience those emotions about themselves. That fear is very real. Shame is very real. It's the towards others, I think, that is difficult.
Right. And that makes sense when like it's like they said the main focus is like maintaining self-image. Everything is your world, your universe. And like they don't, and then like lacking in the ability to feel or experience empathy similarly to others. I think that would fuel that like criticism, failure, shame, because it's like, oh, you don't understand, you don't get it, you're this, you're that. That makes sense.
Yeah. And again, we don't have the experience of NPD. So if there's anyone who does, please reach out. I want to hear from you.
Yeah, this is just our
just highlighting some of the differences here.
And what we maybe think maybe it would feel like.
Yeah.
Based on our own experiences.
Trying to put on those shoes.
Yeah, empathy.
But I do understand, like, from a trauma perspective, it makes sense that the brain would develop in a way that is like, I'm going to shut down any emotion towards anyone else because none of you are safe.
Yep.
And I have to keep myself safe.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And
the brain does wild things.
Yeah. And personality disorder development, particularly cluster B, you and I have both talked about, there is extensive research that trauma can lead to the development of cluster B personality disorders.
Yes.
So
environment,
environment,
genetics,
your brain,
yeah,
all that stuff.
Okay, let's talk about the interpersonal relationships.
Is that your relationships with other people?
Yeah.
Okay. What is
well, it's like your ability to maintain your relationships with other people.
But I always get confused with interpersonal being about other people, because I think of it as interpersonal. So inside my head, my relationship with myself, but that's not what it means.
Yeah, I mean, the way in which your relationship with yourself impacts your ability to have relationship with others.
Oh. Okay, that makes sense.
Like
okay.
my inner shame makes it so that I'm terrified of meeting other people.
Got it.
Like, big impact on my interpersonal relationships because I run away from people. I avoid people.
You are so avoidant.
Everything comes back to attachment, baby. Okay. So people with BPD struggle with intense and unstable relationships. We've talked about this before. I have to put in a profound amount of work to maintain our relationship. And I mean, frankly, that work takes up most of my social battery. So I don't have friends. But we may experience or struggle with like dependency or kind of, I think people refer to us as being clingy. And that word is so demonized. I hate that word. But people with NPD, it says relationships may focus on achieving admiration or control. And so that can be perceived as being exploitative to others. And perception is everything, because people on the receiving end of relationships where an individual might struggle with a personality disorder then are constantly feeling like they're being manipulated. And I understand because they've experienced pain in those relationships, but I think that they forget that the underlying cause of this is, like, what this is saying about people with NPD is feeling control. And everybody wants to fucking feel control because control equals safety.
And predictability.
Predictability equals safety. Like, humans are not all that complex. I mean, our brains are wonky, but like homeostasis, we all want to go back to baseline and stay stable, right? And people with personality disorders who've experienced a lot of trauma, we don't know how to achieve stability.
Yeah.
And so our brain does these weird things to try to achieve stability. And that's why we're constantly unlearning. Like, I'm unlearning how to not be afraid in a car with you.
I know. It's been wild.
It's wild. It also says that people with NPD may struggle with like a genuine emotional connection, which makes sense. And it says that other people may be valued for their utility, which for me, again, this comes back to needing people who can help them stay safe, needing people who can help them feel good.
Right.
Coming back to their own feelings.
Right.
I get it, how that can be demonized, but I also think I really just want to highlight safety. People want to come back to safety. And if we can understand that about people and help them achieve safety, then perhaps there can be a more authentic relationship.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we can also also get into the idea of that, like, everybody needs safety, everybody wants safety, and we have many ways of getting that. And a lot of those are maladaptive, and a lot of those are harmful to the people that we're around, and whether we intend to do it or not.
Right.
There are so many things as a human being that you can do to keep someone close to you.
Oh my God. You are looking at the fucking poster girl for how do I keep people close.
Right.
And yet I don't want people close. It's so strange. So like hookups, for example, getting fucking plastered and hooking up with men for many, 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 many years of my life was a way for me to feel validated. And I'm actually like going through this whole like unlearning process again. Sex is a very complicated thing in my life. I realized the other day It's not just like sexual trauma and rape that makes sex hard for me now in our marriage, but it's also like I'm trying to learn that sex doesn't have to be about I'm worthy,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very weird thing because in the past, if a man thought that I was attractive, even though I am certain like 75 men, you know, who had sex with me, it wasn't because they thought I was attractive. It was because I was there and I had a vagina.
I think you sell yourself short, but okay.
Listen, when you've puked in the bar bathroom and they still have sex with you, it's not because you're cute. Anyways. Okay, let's talk about sense of self. So
Okay.
there's a lot of similarities here. People with, and I say that because we're humanizing. It's important to humanize. People with BPD struggle with our sense of self, obviously, and like feeling like, I don't know who I am.
The mirror.
The mirror. Am I a therapist? Am I a wife? Am I an artist? Am I just a person to have sex with? Am I a child and a family member, even though my family fucking hates me? Like, I don't like. How do all of those things make me up? I don't know. And for me, that's why I've always just stuck to. I'm a social worker. It's the only thing I've ever done. I've never done anything other than work in this field, and I'm that's the one thing I've been able to like create a positive sense of self from. Well, when you're in crazy burnout mode, it's hard then to have a sense of self. We may often like struggle with this need for external validation, and so people with NPD are kind of on the opposite and not side. So this is saying people with NPD may have like an inflated sense of self or feeling of being superior, but that sense of self is actually very fragile and dependent on the external validation of others. And like denial and arrogance is a way of protecting oneself from that criticism. But underneath, there is often actually a profoundly low sense of self or self-esteem.
Yeah.
And that's very similar.
They are similar, and
The way in which they try to achieve self-worth
is so different. And those things, I think, like the sense of self, I think if we just looked at those two particular things, like they would present so differently.
Yes.
But then you factor in all of these other things that are so similar. It makes sense that people often will say like, oh, they're a narcissist, when possibly they just have like untreated borderline personality disorder.
Or trauma. Or this is like just a protective, mechanism. Actually, the percentage of people with NPD is very, very low.
That's because of so few people seek diagnosis, right?
Well, that is true. Very few people with NPD seek
or treatment
seek diagnosis or treatment, and that's part of why I think it's so cool that Nick Cannon has. I would love to hear him talk more about that.
Yeah, maybe he'll give more interviews or something as he kind of learns more about his disorder. That would be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So the prevalence of NPD varies depending on the study, of course. The DSM-5-TR, that's the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, states that from the general population, 0.5 to 1% of the population is diagnosed with NPD. But when you're in a clinical setting, like an inpatient clinical setting, like a psychiatric facility, the rates are higher. So 2 to 16% of individuals in treatment are experiencing NPD. Yeah. Very interesting.
That's quite a bit higher.
Demographics. So 50 to 75% of people with NPD are male or assigned male at birth. I don't know much about the reason for that other than like women are socialized to believe that they can't be arrogant or critical or present that way with high self-esteem or whatever it is outwardly. And then the traits presented with NPD are more pronounced in younger adults and tend to diminish with age. That's true for people with BPD as well. I think like just developmentally and hormonally, that makes sense.
Your body does a natural kind of leveling out in a way, and you start learning how to move through the world. So things tend to be masked or maybe, I don't know, funneled more into something that's societally acceptable as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of get weeded out.
Yeah.
In a way.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
So before we close, I wrote some notes. Again, coming back to the original reason for this is I'm proud that there's person that people know. I'm pretty sure all MTV plays now is Wild 'N Out and Ridiculousness.
I don't even know if they play that anymore.
I do know that the Jersey Shore cast was on Wild 'N Out.
That's tight.
So I'm pretty sure it's still being played. But what happens when we talk about personality disorders and just mental health in general in communities? We're working to reduce stigma and like change the misconceptions about people who are perceived to be bad or dangerous. We're normalizing. So hopefully these conversations are happening in public schools and all of that. We're encouraging early identification and treatment so that a person doesn't have to be, Nick Cannon's age, for example, and have 12 kids before they get treatment.
Yeah, hopefully allowing people not to have to claw and scratch their way to living. Oh my God, I had to live this much of my life before I found out. If I had known, maybe things would have been different or easier or whatever. Minimizing harm. That's harm reduction.
That is absolutely harm reduction. And I mean, I know that there's a crazy high percentage of people with BPD in the prison system, right? Mm-hmm. So if we could do that early intervention and that trauma work and that trauma healing and providing resources and support to communities, then we would keep people out of prisons. And the only thing prison does is just traumatize us more.
Yes.
I actually heard the sweetest story, even though Martha Stewart is not on my list of people that I admire. Mm-hmm. She in prison found ways to make the sweetest desserts for people. Aww. And would figure out how to smuggle them caramel that she made in wherever. And she was because she was in a bunk room, mm-hmm. She was low security or whatever. So she was in a room with a bunch of bunk beds and other, inmates. And they were allowed out in the yard. And I guess there was some sort of fruit bush or something. And she took a clipping of it when she left prison and planted it in her yard.
Huh. Interesting. Aw.
That made me
feel something.
That made me feel something. But again, not a fan of Martha Stewart. Anyways, teaching people about personality disorders help people treat us better. And often people don't treat us very well.
With you.
Yeah.
Not for you, with you.
Oh, for?
No, I mean you gotta work with people with the disorder that you're trying to treat and not work for them.
Yes.
That's what I meant. Because by reducing stigma, you improve mental health services and having informed advocacy and all that. That is with. And you can't be informed unless you're talking to people who have the experience.
Yeah.
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 Again, I mean, I don't have NPD, so I'm just speaking about this from a personality disorder perspective.
Right.
I'd love to have somebody who has NPD come on and chat. One of the other reasons is the more that we talk about this, the less we have to feel like those of us who have a personality disorder are hidden. And I still feel hidden every single day despite having this podcast. I mean, I've said this before. I have, my two best friends in the world, Peggy and Juan, I have never told them I have a personality disorder. Juan has a Facebook, an Instagram account, so I presume that he knows.
Mm-hmm.
I've never told him. He gave a speech at my wedding when I married my ex-wife, and I never told him. Because, like, the thought of telling him just, like, makes me feel so much hate for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you almost didn't want to tell me.
We have to break that cycle of shame.
Yes.
Another reason is protecting people in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
If I had known that I had BPD when I was a case manager and called an occupational therapist a cunt that I was working with, I didn't call it to her face, but I said it very loudly when I hung up the phone. If I had known I had BPD then, that probably wouldn't have happened. But also, maybe my coworkers could have said to me, I think that more needs to be done for you to try to manage what's happening.
Yeah.
That's a really painful example. And then, final thought, when we talk about personality disorders, we start to feel less shame, right? And then maybe we want to work at it more instead of just being like, I have to hide this.
Right.
The more we talk about this, the more community that we build, the more we feel like we're not alone in this, the more we learn about how other people are treating or managing this, then it's easier for us to treat and manage it.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, it's just like, I mean, it all comes back down to like the basic human desire of having community and wanting to be safe, right? So like, you have to talk about things in order to build community, and I don't mean like trauma dumping on your buddy or whatever, like actually sitting down and saying your piece and being able to hear the other person's piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think people with NPD are not encouraged to talk about the things that they struggle with, or that is something that they have to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't learn it unless we give them space to learn it, and
right.
and unless we like view them as human.
Right, and that is something that I think, I'll just say my personal experience, anything I've ever heard about NPD, that is lacking. That humanizing them,
Yes.
is very lacking. And again, I take everything with a grain of salt. So there's what they say. There's two sides to everything.
Probably more like 3.
Probably, but like the duality of a human being, is complicated. And I think that like, just as much as we have to stop talking about people with borderline as these crazy, manipulative, dramatic, abusive human beings, I think we do.
Or people with autism as like a quote unquote savant.
Yes,
it's like that's
savant,
not
or they're perfect sweet baby angels. It's like no.
Yeah, like
no.
don't infantilize.
Right. Like you can be on the autism spectrum and be an asshole. Like that's just that you can. It's a thing. And just like, we have to stop talking about people with narcissistic personality disorder as these cold, unfeeling, psychotic, horrible abusers. I'm not saying that all of the examples I've given don't exist. They do. And
Well, that's true for anyone, regardless if they have a mental health disorder or not.
right. You know what I mean? But I think like as comforting as it is to stay black and white and to talk about types of people, subtypes of people as just this black and white generalization based on your experience or not your experience or whatever, as comfortable as that is, it's not good for the long term. That doesn't do anything for you in the long term. And I learned that black and white thinking is a cognitive distortion. And that's not good at all, because that means that you're not viewing a well-rounded reality or a well-rounded perspective. So like challenging like our own black and white thinking, I think, is important. And what better way to start than with a stigmatized group of people, which is the cluster B personality disorders.
Yeah, I think there's no better time right now, especially in this country, to like learn about people and build that community.
And I'm not saying excusing harmful behavior
From anyone.
I am saying, though, like, set your boundaries, hold your boundaries, and let's not make any more demons and out of human beings than already exist, right? Like, we don't need to add any more fuel to that fire.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Although I do love Charmed.
Oh, yeah. Charmed is pretty great. I'm watching Gilmore Girls right now.
We're going to cut that. All right, y'all. Thank you for another episode, or thank you for listening to another episode of the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. I'll hear you in the new year, 2025. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
I can't believe it's been 25 years since I was doing cartwheels waiting for the millennial. My parents were drinking margaritas.
Yep.
I hope everyone has a healthy and safe rest of the year. And we'll see you in 2025. Thank you for tuning in to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your content. That's super helpful for me in finding additional folks who want to listen to the show, want to feel seen, family members, partners who want to understand. You can also follow along at Bold Beautiful Borderline or at Sarah's Wellness Way on Instagram. For the blog and a more extensive list of resources, go to boldbeautifulborderline.com. There you can also request to be a guest on the show, or you can do my favorite thing and leave a voicemail to be played at one of our future episodes. All of this information can be seen below in the show notes. If you'd like to support the show and get exclusive perks, consider becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me with creating content to destigmatize BPD and all the other wild mental health struggles that I discuss on this podcast. As always, thank you so much for guests and listeners alike. I love you. Until next time, keep living and seeking joy. Information in this podcast is not medical advice, but rather experience from individuals living with mental illnesses. If you want to try a treatment that you heard about, please consult your treatment team. The music in this podcast was created by a longtime friend of mine, Corey Evans from the Evergreen Band. You can find him on Instagram at @the_Evergreen Band. Cover art was created by my husband, Talon Abbott. Their information is in the show notes. There is no producer for this show. It's all me.